Hi, I'm here again and I am going to talk about a wonderful guy who lives in our head, whom I refer to as the inner critic. Now, I use the word wonderful in a sarcastic way. He's really not wonderful. Because what is the inner critic? Let's understand that today a little bit more. Inner critic is that part of our subconscious mind who's always putting us down, who's always humiliating us or maybe finding flaws at us. So if you made your favorite paneer curry today, then after tasting it, you say, "Oh, it's so much spice. Oh, I think I burnt it a little bit. Oh, I didn't make it very well." So when you have that part of your subconscious mind who's constantly finding flaws at what you do, that is the inner critic. Or say you have submitted your assignment, you just finished submitting your assignment, and as you submitted it, you looked at it again and you said, "Oh my God, I made so many mistakes. I could have done this. I should have done this. This was not okay. Or I should have submitted it last week. I submitted it late, or it was not done well." When you identify flaws in the way that you do things, that part of your subconscious mind which is identifying the flaws is the inner critic. Now, you might say, "Lata, inner critic? But I need that part of my mind pointing out flaws for me, but otherwise I will do a miserable job." Of course, we need a voice inside as well as outside telling us, okay, this should be a little better, or this could be a little better. But the difference is the inner critic, attitude of the inner critic is extremely harsh. So, I'll give an example. You make your paneer curry. Now, if you have a very low, calm inner critic who doesn't really get so affected, you taste the paneer curry and say, "Yeah, it's made, there's a little less salt and a little bit more spice. But guess what? I did the best today and I'm going to enjoy it." So you see, in the critical part of your mind is not so active in this situation. Now come to situation 2. And you make the paneer curry. And this time you taste the paneer curry and the inner critic flashes out and says, "Oh my God, you're so miserable. How many times to tell you to add less salt? You put too much of salt." Or the inner critic flashes like a little monster in your head and he says, "This paneer curry is absolutely useless. You don't deserve to cook it. I don't think anybody will ever want to eat it." And when that behavior is so harsh, you are not able to take it, or it makes you feel less than, it makes you feel not so good about yourself. And that is the effect of the inner critic. Now, the difference between somebody just pointing out something very factfully and the difference between somebody putting you down is the difference between an observation of salt being less, or assignment, what else could have been done in the assignment, vis-a-vis the difference between somebody putting you down and saying salt is less and assignment is horrible, or you should have done it long back, and things like that. So the tone of voice that comes from the inside your head is a very clear indication of the inner critic. So that is one, the tone of the voice. The second indication of the inner critic is the amount of critical feedback, right? Now, quantity of feedback. So going back to the paneer curry, you taste once and you just notice, "Oh, I think the salt is less." That is probably very little inner critic or no inner critic at all. Now you taste the paneer sabji and there is this voice in you, "This paneer sabji is too much salt." That is the tone of the voice. Now given the same situation, you taste the paneer curry and there you have the inner critic flashing and saying, "How many times to tell you have to put less salt? How many times? Too much salt, horrible, this is horrible." And it keeps repeating again and again and again, and they're telling you again and again that the salt was bad. That is again an indication of a strong inner critic. Do you relate to all of this? As you're listening to this, put a line in the comment below if you relate to any aspect of what I'm saying. If you feel that voice in your head putting you down, that is the voice of the inner critic. Now you may say, Lata, but what do I do about it? We will come to that in a few moments. Hopefully I can address some parts of it by the end of this video. Let me first share with you why does it happen, or what is the correlation between the voice of the inner critic and our childhood experiences. Yes, you heard it right. Childhood experiences play a big role in this guy called the inner critic. And how does that happen? If you have a parent, or you had a parent in your childhood who was extremely harsh and critical, that voice of the parent translates into the voice of the inner critic and becomes your own voice. So if you had a dad who was always looking at your grades and saying, you got only 98 out of 100, not good, you should get 100. That is the voice of the inner critic now, which looks at your assignment and says, not good, you didn't do well in your assignments. Now, the parent, going back flashback to your parents, it could be your mom, it could be your dad, it could be your teacher, but a voice of an adult who was an authority figure, who constantly criticized you, constantly put you down, or constantly wanted you to do your best, or never happy with what you did. That voice of that parent becomes the voice of your inner critic now. I just want to highlight it. I don't want you to feel bad about it. You're just observing, because our parents are doing the best that they can. They are doing it from a happy space. They may not be doing it from a happy space, but they are doing the best they can given the resources they have, given the mental attitudes they have, given the own way of parenting that they have had. So we are not trying to blame our parents or our teachers, but rather acknowledging and observing that sometimes those kind of behaviors of our parents becomes the voice of our inner critic. And this is the genesis or root of it. Now, the question arises, what do we do about it? What do we do about this inner critic? So my suggestion is, start with saying hi to the inner critic. Say hi. And why do we say hi? Because when we say hi, we acknowledge that the inner critic is not us. It is another. It is a part of our subconscious mind that is coming from our past. And it helps us being aware. So when you acknowledge and say hi to the inner critic, you are aware of the inner critic, you acknowledge the presence of the inner critic, and you also tell yourself, I am not the inner critic, and I don't necessarily have to be just follow the instructions of the inner critic. I don't have to be the way that the inner critic wants me to be. The other thing that we can do is practice self-love. And I talk a lot about self-love in many of my videos, but that is very important, because when you start being loving and caring for yourself, you start learning how to deal with the inner critic. So these were the 3 things that I shared with you. I'm going to summarize it again. Today, I introduced all of you to this guy called the inner critic, who is sitting in your own subconscious mind. And this guy may be a very shy monster or a very fierce monster, but he has monster-like qualities. So I urge you to think about what kind of guy is that sitting in your head for you. And we also talked about how this guy how do you know, can you identify if it's an inner critic or it's just a need for observing and improving yourself. Because need for observing and improving yourself is very, very important. But when that need for improving yourself becomes like an obsession and constant fault finding, constantly finding flaws in whatever you do, whatever you think, whatever choices you make, that is the voice of the inner critic. And what is the effect of having an inner critic like that? The effect of having the inner critic is you feel miserable, you feel your self-esteem comes down, you feel very low, your moods may go up and down, and you may also end up becoming harsh towards others. So if you're a team leader and you have a strong inner critic, you might be very harsh with your team members. If you're a parent and you have a strong inner critic, then you might find yourself being very harsh with your children as well. So you might find yourself passing on this subconscious pattern of inner critic to others as well. So just observe that. The other thing we talked about today was the genesis of this inner critic, which is coming from your own childhood. Maybe a harsh parent, maybe a harsh teacher, and that pattern is what we have observed. And that is becoming the voice of the inner critic. And finally, we shared about what can we do about it. And there were two things that I shared. One is say hi to the inner critic, just acknowledge the presence of the inner critic. And the second is practice self-love and self-compassion. With this, I'm going to end today. There was lots of things to do, but just tell yourself, or just observe with yourself, that am I having this inner critic? And the next time you make your paneer sabji, or you make your curry, or make your soup, just observe. What is that voice inside your head telling you? Is it being observing? Is it observing, or is it being very, very critical? Because that will give you an indication of whether you have an inner critic, and whether that inner critic is harsh, monster-like, or soft, monster-like. Because either way, the inner critic becomes a little monster-like in its behavior. I hope you benefited from this video, and I hope you've learned something new. Put it in the comments if you have learned something new, and share about how your inner critic feels to you. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.